force members.
Okay, I'll go ahead and kick things off. So thank you for being flexible and then agreeing to meet again just a couple of weeks after our last task force meeting, where we put together an overly ambitious agenda and only got through about half of the content that we wanted to get through. But it was a really super interesting meeting. My thanks again to Matt from the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association for his excellent presentation on all of the broadband challenges that the tribes face. And then I really appreciate the providers who were willing and able to give updates on the emergency broadband benefit program and distribution of that incentive and all of the outreach efforts that were underway. And then it was also really good to learn about SDG&E's undergrounding work and the abilities that we are going to have moving forward to perhaps partner with them to keep building out the fiber network in areas where it's missing. So what we didn't get to last time was really important. So we decided to schedule the second meeting, and I really hope today that everyone will actively participate. I know we're all zoomed out 16, 17, 18 months now into pandemic and all of these meetings, and it's hard to stay focused, but this is an important one. We really want feedback from all of you on the initial strategies for the regional digital equity strategy and action plan. So the way we want to structure today is, in every meeting, we've shared a little bit of the data analysis, some new data that we found, some of the analysis, but today we want to just kind of look at all of the gap analysis findings. So we'll go through some of those maps again all together, as opposed to just kind of piecemeal like we have in the past, and then talk about how those have informed some initial strategies. Now, realizing we have this effort underway with Cisco that we've shared with you, all of these stakeholder interviews that are going to be occurring later this month, identifying policy barriers to broadband deployment, and we may want to tweak or add additional strategies once that work is complete at the end of the summer. But based on all of the work that's been done to date, all of the data that we've been able to acquire and analyze, we've come up with, I think, a really good framework for the strategy and an overall outline for the entire strategy. So we won't be able to look at that outline in detail. It's a pretty well constructed outline and we're going to share it with you. I think we can add it as an attachment to the chat, but then we'll send it. Okay, great. Thanks, Crystal. But then we'll send it out after the meeting, and we'll give you 2 weeks to take a look at that and the strategies and provide feedback. So digest it today, give us your initial thoughts. We'll give you a Word document. You can use track changes and send stuff, or leave comments and send it back to us. And then we'll take all of that feedback in and come back with a final strategy and outline shortly thereafter. So for the discussion, I think probably the easiest way to handle it with so many folks is raise hand when we get to that part today, or at any point you want to ask a question, just raise your hand, please. But otherwise, if you can keep your mics muted, that is helpful so we don't get a lot of background noise during the meeting today. So with that, one of the other items that we wanted to just provide an update on was sort of the development of communication strategies and plans. I don't know if Lindsay's with us, our communications liaison, and can just talk a little bit about our new webpage finally that's up and the training for the Speakers Bureau.
Yes, thanks, Antoinette. I'll be very quick because I know we have a lot to cover today. So as Antoinette mentioned, and you can see here, we do have a new web page that's focused on this effort, sandag.org/digital equity. There's a little screenshot of it there. We'll be using that page to share research, updates, resources, pretty much anything as we go through this process. So probably a good web page to bookmark so you can reference it, and we'll definitely email this out to everybody as well. Just a quick reminder to share your social media handles with us. I'll share a link in the chat that we have emailed out a form and asked for that information, just so we can cross-promote, any content related to the digital divide and digital equity work. And then a couple of upcoming events I wanted to flag for the group. A few of you expressed some interest in participating in a Speakers Bureau. So we have set up a training and we're working on a slide deck. So if you are available and interested, just let us know. That training will be Wednesday, July 14th, 1 to 2 p.m. And then later in July, we are working with Cisco to plan a roundtable event where we'll highlight our partnership and our work to help bridge the digital divide. We're still ironing out some of the details, but the date and the time are there, and I will share more information as soon as I can. With that, I will hand it back over to Antoinette.
Yeah, so some of you had agreed to be on the Speakers Bureau at a previous meeting, and we have that list. But if you weren't at that meeting, or maybe at the time you weren't interested and now you are, just put your name in the chat so that we can add you to the invitation. And we'll have speaking points. We'll go through the slide deck, and then basically, when we get requests to give presentations, and we've been getting quite a few of them, we'll divide and conquer on these. So we'll reach out to folks who signed up for the Speakers Bureau and who are trained to give the presentation to see if they're available to do the presentation on behalf of the task force. So thank you all for your willingness to do that. Let's keep going through. Okay, so I mentioned this, we have a very robust outline actually, but for the purposes of the presentation, I just wanted to show the sections of the strategy that we're putting together. So a lot of this is material that we've been working on with input from you over the course of the last 5 or 6 months. So you've seen kind of bits and pieces of it, and now we're sort of bringing it all together so it tells a really nice story about the digital divide in the San Diego region, and then how we're proposing to address the digital divide. So you may recall, and I think we shared links, we've developed some kind of 101 broadband and digital equity pieces. So we want to incorporate that into the introduction. What is broadband? What is the digital divide? What does it look like in the San Diego region? A little bit of background on how we got here, why SANDAG is leading this work, who the task force members are, the vision, framework, goals, and guiding principles that this group weighed in on heavily several months ago. And then the gap analysis, which we're going to step through, key pieces of the gap analysis momentarily, and then the strategies for addressing those gaps. And we'll divide that up based on the framework that you all helped us to develop around access and adoption. So under access, we have some specific goals for the strategy, and under adoption, we have some specific goals. So basically everything kind of bolded and italicized on this slide are materials that have been pretty well developed. The strategy we're working on with you now. And then once we all agree on the strategy, then we'll move into those specific actions. So keep in mind, the strategy is still pretty high level. And then there'd be a lot of really specific actions and tasks for near term and medium term or midterm with different organizations identified as having a primary or secondary role in addressing that action. So that'll come next. And then the other piece that will be included in this is that economic impact analysis. So really, what's our return on investment for making this investment in digital equity? And that'll be the kind of a selling point for all of us as we go forward and seek funding to do this work and show that there's a really good return on investment for the resources that will be going into this. So that's the kind of outline or structure for the digital equity strategy. I don't know, Crystal, if we've put the outline in the chat yet. Yep, it looks like maybe we have. No, not yet.
Not now.
Okay, but it's coming your way momentarily. Next slide. I want to move into the gap analysis, which actually Sanjeev is going to lead, but I'll just kick it off here really quickly. So like I said, at all of our meetings, we've been bringing forward new pieces of data, which has been incredibly difficult, as we've talked about, at all of our meetings to acquire. And there's a lot of just discrepancies in the data. And you'll see a little bit more of that as we go through the gap analysis today. But we've been able to use that to, at least at the regional scale, identify, where there are gaps in infrastructure, where there's maybe some service disparities, where adoption is low. So I'm going to hand it over to Sanjeev to kind of walk through those key findings before we jump into the various strategies, starting with just an overview of the different data sources that we've used thus far, and some of the data sources that we still need, because honestly, this is never going to be done. You know, we're going to have to continuously be seeking data and better data, and adding to our gap analysis, because what we're learning is that what we have today just really isn't adequate, and we need to be able to evaluate our success, right? So once we start moving forward with implementing the strategic plan, we're going to need data to help demonstrate that we're actually making progress on our goals. So a key part of our strategy is really going to be about the data component. So Sanjeev, I'm going to pass it on to you to kind of walk through all of the.
Thanks, Antoinette. I'm happy to elaborate more on what you just covered. Can you move to the next slide, please, James? We've been at this for say something like feels like 6 months or so, and it's been a variety of data sources that we've been using and looked at, and so it's really important to highlight that they come from diverse. The data comes from diverse data sources. They use different geographies. Some use census blocks, and some use zip codes, and some places we had to aggregate to larger geographies because of inadequate data and so on. Another sort of aspect that you need to kind of keep in mind is that some data is collected, like the census, ACS, American Community Survey data, is collected over the period of over a period of 2015 2019. Other places we've tried to use the latest data set from 2021. Sometimes those are impacted by the pandemic, so we're trying to come to an even later data sort of post maybe the last quarter and so on. So it's been one, a learning exercise, and two, kind of making sure that we keep this in mind, that there's a variety of differences in where the data comes from. So when things don't quite match up or don't agree, sometimes the explanation may lie in the fact that they're covering different geographies or different time periods. Then there's the other sort of aspect where some are surveys and self-reported data from ISPs, surveys of households, and so on and so forth. Other data sets are things like measured data speeds and so on, which are collected, which have other biases associated with the fact that there's some self-selection bias when people initiate speed tests and so on and so forth. So given all these caveats, it's amazing that there is still an opportunity to come up with takeaways that we can all agree upon, and then say develop this strategy and action plan. So I'll just leave those caveats there and start talking about, and very, very briefly try to summarize what we've learned over the last several months. And I'll try to keep it brief because I think please treat it as just a summary. So the next slide, please, James. So the first thing, next slide, please. The first thing we found, as we recall from way back, is that there's this FCC, and that data is reflected in CPUC. So we use the CPUC data set about internet and broadband service available in our region. And so the right plot shows census blocks where 25 megabits per second down and 3 megabits per second up, which is the FCC definition of broadband, where those speeds are available. So you can see that in much of our urban part of our county, 25/3 is available, and then there are portions not in the outside the urban part of the county where 25/3 may not be available. The left plot shows the number of broadband, fixed broadband providers in this in the region. And so here, kind of what is to be sort of highlighted, I think, is that in most of our region there are 2 providers, with the light green color, and there's some places where there are 3 or 4, but in other places there's only 1, which can be obviously very, very challenging, both in terms of the quality of the broadband available and the cost. And we'll see all that in in upcoming slides. So next slide, please. So then when in the FCC and CPUC data, what is the assumption self-reported by ISPs, the assumption is that if there's a census block where a household is provided service at broadband speeds, then it's captured as if the whole census block is provided access at broadband speeds. But Broadband Now decided to kind of investigate that or dig deeper into that. And so they did some reverse kind of lookup of addresses in those census blocks or in those zip codes. This was done, so just to keep matters a little bit confusing. So this Broadband Now work is on zip codes. And so this work on zip codes, they tried to explore or research whether in any given zip code, whether if it indicated that a certain broadband quality service was available, whether it was actually possible if they inputted addresses into the ISP database. And they discovered that that although, as you can see, in much of the county, it is actually true that 100% of the addresses can get internet at broadband speeds. In the rural and tribal and unincorporated portions of our county, you can see that the percentage of households where broadband service is available can be much smaller than 100%, sometimes way less than 50% as well. So that's unavailability of access to broadband. Next slide, please. And so continuing with Broadband Now, so this slide and the previous one may look similar, but they're completely different data. So the previous one was percentage of households or percentage of population that has access to broadband in certain parts of the county, which were colored other than yellow. This slide actually shows the cost of broadband. So look at the correlation here. So it turns out that outside this urban core, which is yellow, a lot of portions of the county end up paying a lot more for broadband, such as $55 or 60, or even more in some cases. In the tribal land, some people paying $90. And there's MLab data here as well, shown with these little points that show what the speed is, the available speeds in those places, in those zip codes. And now we notice that the highest cost is often not associated with the high quality in broadband. So this is not a surprise either, but this is nice data that informs what our strategy and actions need to be. Next slide, please. So the next thing to look at is this ACS data, American Community Survey data, where we tried to understand the association with adoption with low-income households, whether low-income households have broadband subscriptions. And here we're trying to understand which portions of our county or our region low-income households do not have broadband subscriptions. And the dark parts are where the percentages are sort of highest percentages don't have access, or the highest percentages of low-income households lacking broadband subscription. And so here again we see the expected places such as these eastern southern part of the county, but the region, but as well as some of those places in the urban low income, where, for example, the typical the dark ones here. It turns out the zip codes with the highest percentage of people lacking access to broadband could be as high as 15, 20 to 20%. Turns out to be things like places like City Heights, Logan Heights, National City, and so on, in addition to the unincorporated regions. Next slide, please. And so one thing that we've been noticing around the country, and in particular, our cities, city of San Diego and others, and the county, what we've been doing is provide hotspots as a stopgap measure to provide some access to the internet during this pandemic. We've been distributing hotspots, and so we also, as you know, we discussed this in a previous meeting. We have now access to data from Ookla, and Ookla has data, speed test data for fixed broadband as well as mobile broadband. And so one takeaway that we have from the data, we're continuing to analyze Ookla data, and there'll be more that we'll have to share in the future. But one of the things we find is that while for fixed broadband, there were only 7 zip codes in our region that didn't meet the 25 megabit download speeds in the case of fixed broadband. In the case of mobile broadband, there were actually 51 zip codes that didn't meet the 25 megabits per second download speed. So what that means is that the hotspots are only going to be as good as your mobile broadband service, and so we're not going to meet broadband data rates for our underserved communities by using hotspots. And that sort of brings me to the next point, where basically we've been arguing in this task force that we really need to worry about middle mile fiber. And the next slide, James, please. So we've been, as you know, we've been trying to understand middle mile fiber availability in our region. And so one of the first things we were looking for was to just understand where fiber exists. And it's been pretty challenging because it's not available. That information is proprietary for most service providers. The CPUC has access. CPUC is the providers share that data with CPUC, and through some indirect means, in this sort of anonymized fashion, we were able to get some understanding of where fiber exists in the region. And this slide is sort of this representation of fiber in the region in a coarse, in a a blurred way, where basically we've mapped census blocks where fiber passes through in some way. It could be backbone, it could be middle mile, it could even be for last mile, but typically it may be middle mile and backbone fiber. So you can see, I mean, one sort of the big picture takeaway is that there's plenty of fiber in most of the urban part of our county. And there's a clear gap of not being fiber in the rural part of the county. Sort of this exception where Route 8 going off to the east has fiber because it's some sort of backbone fiber, but as we've seen in previous maps, services, high quality service is not available in these southeast part of our county. So the next slide shows another research or activity that we've been doing is mapping public fiber that is deployed in our county. And so this is an incomplete picture of that. This shows this was available to us from, we've been collecting at SANDAG, this information about transit agency fiber and transportation agency fiber. So we have, these are fiber deployments from MTS, NCTD, and Caltrans, and so on. So so clearly what I was going to add is that what is lacking is what we're trying to pursue is to get the same kind of information from public fiber deployed from cities. We can also add on top of this the fiber deployed by Scenic and available at community centers and so on and so forth. So this can be made much more comprehensive. And the main point here is that, as we know, that there's this affordability gap, and there's a great opportunity to take public sector fiber and leverage it to expand service, increase competition, and reduce cost and deliver on this affordability gap for the digital divide. And the next slide, please. And we'll talk more about the strategy and actions around that. And so the other activity, excuse me, the other activity that we've been doing that I just want to very quickly summarize is that we spent a month or two doing extensive interviews of both our jurisdictions and public agencies in the region, as well as ISPs. And the main takeaways are for these interviews, the main takeaways are that we basically, our municipalities must play a critical role in achieving digital equity. So to date, the involvement that in actually broadband planning and processes has been pretty limited. They've been limited to permitting, but not particularly focused on planning for broadband. Private companies have basically decided where and when fiber would be laid out, and the price and quality of the service, and the public agencies and municipalities and jurisdictions have focused on permitting, and even there, sometimes it's not seamless and so on. So that's been the kind of thing where we can what has been a slow and costly process of broadband deployment can be speeded up if we had broadband plans that cities and municipalities had, and permitting processes that were seamless. And so it'll take a partnership of our jurisdictions and private companies to close the digital gap. And so that's another sort of takeaway that we have from the work we've done in the last 6 months. So that sort of summarizes both the data and the maps that we've created so far, as well as the data that we've collected from interviews of jurisdictions as well as ISPs. Next slide, please. I think that
actually, before we jump into the strategies, we just threw out a lot of maps and data. So I want to take a pause.
Yes.
I'm sure there's questions. If you want us to go back to any particular maps, or if you have, actually, we have Yelena on, who is our mapping experts, who's been supporting us with this work. So if there's any questions about data sources or maps, now is an opportunity. I'm going to take just a minute. Any surprises in what you saw? Was this what everyone was expecting? Quiet bunch. Yes, Patty, thank you.
Yeah, there were some surprises, especially on the maps in certain regions. I expected more broadband users. I'm interested to know if we have, or we've looked, or we may consider what the correlation is of those who don't have broadband, home broadband. Do they have wireless? Like, are they on internet mobile only? And how that impacts.
We could actually do that analysis with ACS, and we probably should do that. Yelena, that was a question that was asked in the survey, was whether or not they had a mobile plan.
Yes, we haven't pulled that data yet.
Okay, that would be great. We're hearing from a lot of our families that while they may not have broadband, they do have their mobile phones. And that's been what they've been using. So it's been interesting to learn then, how we can that, or how they're using then their mobile phones for connectivity.
Yep. Cody, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I think the take home here is this is the Wild West. I mean, it's crazy. Data, rules, policies. I mean, it's total Wild West. So, I mean, when I see something like this, I think, here we are trying to heroically cobble something together, but this is at least a state problem, if not a federal problem. So, it's a moment where I stop and go, we better call on the cavalry here. I mean, this is something that we should be talking to Senator Atkins and Assemblymember Gonzalez, and you know what I mean? I think this is where we want to start talking to, and even Congressman Levin and our congressional. That's just my take on this, is like, we're trying to cobble this together, and we really we need some structure.
We got our work cut out for us, that's for sure.
It's true. I think both facts are true. I think there is a focus statewide as well. It's also true that they're also lacking, these kinds of. So we are in some sense we might be taking a lead in some portions, but it'd be nice to collaborate, coordinate. Agree with you.
Kelsey has her hand raised.
Yeah, I think this is consistent with what we've been seeing. And also, I think it illustrates digital redlining, in a lot of our communities in the city of San Diego. I was wondering if you could, these will be great slides if we could use them with some of our presentations. If you could do an analysis showing race, that would be really helpful. Thanks.
We could do that with the ACS data, I believe, Yelena.
Yes, and I believe we have pulled that data and done some preliminary region-wide summary statistics on minorities and broadband cross sections, and those might have been presented in some of the earlier. If not, then that's something we can put on the docket to keep working on.
And I think we should emphasize what Yelena just said. Basically, I think it's as we slice and dice further, the ACS data gets more and more, fewer and fewer numbers of, and so it's easier to kind of summarize those statistics region-wide than to focus on. So we were interested in understanding some of this regional variations, which is why we're not slicing and dicing into many demographics.
Any other questions or reactions to?
I see a comment in the chat from Maureen around, consideration for satellite connectivity as well, in addition to broadband and mobile service.
Yeah, so we definitely have looked at satellite. It often does not meet the kind of speed threshold, that 25.3 federal speed threshold. So that's the issue with satellite right now, currently. Hopefully that technology will improve. Oh, Kemi, you're back. Hi. You have your hand raised.
Yes, hi.
Good to see you.
Yeah, so this doesn't surprise me. It's a little sad, and I didn't catch his name, but he said how this is a really big issue. And some of it is because it's been purposely done, because there's been more of a focus on keeping everything stacked within your urban areas because of just the cost of bringing resources out. And so the West have been left pretty wild as it is. And we just got used to, at least the people who live there have just gotten used to that. That's just the way it is. But now it's becoming a little more noticeable because since of COVID and kids not being able to go to school, and then more people are moving out there because it's just too expensive. So that's what's bringing more of this observation, but it's been like that for a while. And for most of the people who should know better have accepted it. And it's sad.
All right, so why don't we move into the strategies unless there are any other questions or comments? Going once, going twice, okay. James, could you switch the slide for me? Thank you. All right, so we separated out the strategies into access and adoption, like the framework, and we'll start with the strategies around access. So go ahead and click for me the first one. So as Sanjeev, pointed out, municipalities really haven't played a huge role in, broadband planning and deployment. The city of San Diego, I think, is, one of the exceptions. In the city of Chula Vista on our task force, they have digital equity work, programs, strategies that they're working, but that's really rare. A lot of cities that we spoke to and interviewed really weren't thinking about broadband as a public service. And so one of the strategies we feel that's important is building consensus that broadband is an essential public service that contributes towards greater equity and economic opportunity. And we need to work to standardize the practice of incorporating broadband into state, regional, and local plans and projects. You know, as a transportation planning agency, you've seen that we've already started to advance some of that. We're working to incorporate fiber into roadway rehabilitation projects, starting with SR 67. We're making sure that it's a major part of our new regional transportation plan. The state has recently developed their broadband action plan, and other state agencies are figuring out how broadband can become a part of their regular, you know, business operations, like Caltrans and their Dig Once policy. But at the local level, that's where we still have some work to do, and making sure that, you know, the local agencies are considering broadband in all of their plans and their projects as well. It doesn't need to just be major state highways where we're putting fiber in. There's local projects that are underway where that can happen as well. So that's the first strategy. Next up. We also, along those same lines, it's not just about the planning, but we've found that there are some policies that are prohibitive, that permitting practices are not supportive of quick deployment of broadband. So we wanted to develop those model policies and permitting practices and help to get our local jurisdictions to adopt those. So the second strategy is more focused on streamlining permitting, developing supportive processes, but focusing that streamlining on the areas of greatest need. Our work here is not about getting broadband into places that already have good broadband or making it better for places that already have it. We want to support those communities that are currently not able to participate in digital education, work, all of the shopping, recreation, all of the activities online. Third, is you saw that while we don't have as much public infrastructure in the eastern parts of the county, the rural parts of the county, we do have a lot of fiber infrastructure and other assets in the urban area that can be leveraged. So figuring out how to share those assets by developing standardized agreements for sharing fiber infrastructure is an initiative that we've already started. So we'll be, you know, because we have this project on SR 67, we need a good fiber sharing agreement amongst all of the parties that'll be a part of that project, but we don't want to do it for specific projects. We want a regional fiber sharing agreement that's modular and can be adapted for, you know, different types of projects for local agencies, for SANDAG, for the state, for, you know, our private partners who we are hoping will participate in those projects. Next up. And then that really allows us to drive expansion of an open access middle mile fiber network through partnerships. So that's local agencies, that's SDG&E, and we heard from them at our last meeting about all of the trenching work that they have. There was a hearing, public hearing yesterday or the day before with the CPUC, the regulating agency for public utilities, and they are requiring that the public utilities like SDG&E implement Dig Once and get fiber into projects. And so SDG&E was able to say that they're working with our task force and they're working with us to kind of implement Dig Once, and that was good. It sounds like they were praised for that. Some of the other public utilities weren't as far along. So those are the types of partnerships that will help us to get that middle mile fiber expanded into the, primarily right now where it's needed is the rural parts of San Diego County. But we're not limiting it obviously there. And that's why we want to make better use of the fiber infrastructure that we already have in our urban areas to bring down cost, hopefully, and get better service to communities. Next bullet. Making sure that we're prioritizing infrastructure construction and service improvements in unserved and underserved communities. That's why this broadband gap analysis has been so critical, because we really need to identify those. I think at the regional scale, it's pretty obvious. We still lack the data to be able to see, where some of the issues are at the smaller community scale. And we'll just have to keep continuing to gather that data to help identify those gaps. But we just want to make sure that for our efforts, we're incentivizing infrastructure investments in the areas of greatest need. Next bullet. And then supporting policy and legislative initiatives that mandate service performance and affordability standards. We're actively involved now in doing that. You've heard from our legislative affairs folks that come to all of our meetings and give updates on legislation that we're supporting. We've been, actively working to seek funding for the federal funding, state funding to implement our strategy here. So I think we have a pretty good legislative program started and underway, and we'll continue with that. Next slide. And of course, advocating for better public data and greater transparency around service availability, performance, and cost. If we've discovered nothing else, it's that we really need, it needs to be easier to do this work. So I want to stop here. This is before we go into the strategies around adoption. And again, remember, these are the high-level strategies. Each of these strategies will have many more specific actions and tasks associated with them for both near term and midterm. But we'll take a pause and see if we have any comments or questions from the team, from the task force members. Everyone just taking it all in?
Just a reminder that we'll share this draft strategy outline that contains all of these strategies after the meeting. So if you need some more time to digest, we'll be sending the materials after, but don't be shy, use the chat or raise your hand, speak up. We'd love to hear from you.
So remember again, the access side is more focused on the infrastructure. And that's what these strategies are. How do we get more infrastructure and make better use of the infrastructure that's out there? Okay, I'm surprised that there's no comments here. I was expecting a little bit more discussion, but we'll give you a minute to take it in. We'll go on to the adoption strategy. Patty, thank you.
Sorry, I have lots of questions. So it looks like this is obviously, it looks fantastic, really focused on policy, right, and changing broadband aspects. Do we want to consider at all just the adoption piece of it? So we're talking about, connectivity and the technology, but really specifically speaking for the families that, I'm lifting up their voices. This is not what they use all the time, right? So adopting it into their lives is also, that third hurdle that we've been working with.
Next slide, Patty. This is access and adoptions next. We broke it into two sections. Terry, thank you. You're muted, Terry.
Quick question, and also
You're good. You're good now.
All right. Thank you. I should have figured that out after 16 months of the pandemic, but there's mute. Just a comment here, and maybe this is in following slides, but as we look at a strategy, we look at messaging and so forth. Just curious to know, are we or does this body have an interest in defining broadband? I know we talk a little bit about particularly the FCC. I know we look at that in the education space as far as E-rate funding and so forth. And but the current 25 megabits is really substandard, quite frankly. There was mention from Cody, I think, earlier about legislators, and unfortunately there was a great piece of legislation from Senator Gonzalez, SB 1130, that didn't make it through a previous legislative session. But one of the things that I really liked about that one, and that other education leaders across the state appreciated, was that it noted the definition as being 100 megabits symmetric. So not to get too granular here into specific speeds or technologies, but I'm just wondering in terms of advocacy, if we're thinking about some sort of common definitions that we might rally around. that find, again, in the education space where we have handed out tens of thousands of hotspots to San Diego students in the last year and a half has really been about looking at not only speeds, but also latency, right? I know it was brought up in the chat about satellite. I've got a personal love-hate relationship with satellite and the different types of providers. We have one that we've been piloting that has extremely high latency and makes it very difficult for collaborative meetings, video streaming, like we're doing right here, and others that might be better. But obviously, terrestrial services are the absolute best option. And so maybe that's already been defined in a prior meeting, but that was just a wondering I had, and I thought I would throw it out to the group.
Yeah, Terry, I think we've been assuming the governor's executive order and the call for 100 megabits across the state is what we're aiming for, but certainly we can have a discussion about that. I mean, we've said since we started this group that 25.3 isn't going to be adequate. Maybe it was in 2015 when it was established, but it certainly isn't in today's environment. So 100 megabits has sort of been what we're aiming for, but that's a discussion we should have.
Excellent.
Any other?
So Jeffrey, just wanted to ask a quick question. How about the final mile challenge with connecting houses to fiber in areas that are not available by broadband providers? Was that like part of the strategy? I don't know if I see it there.
Yeah, I think working with providers as partners and, helping by building out the middle mile to facilitate that, but also, in the urban areas, making better use of the public sector fiber, we think will also incentivize that last mile. And through the streamlined permitting practices and making sure that we're streamlining and focusing on the permitting in areas that are underserved and unserved. So I think it's captured in various strategies.
Okay, very good. Thanks. I think it's one of the big challenges.
Okay, well, let's move to the adoption side then. And this is an area where we'll talk momentarily. We still kind of lack data, and we'll be looking to many of your organizations to help us with that. We have a little call to action coming up. But go ahead, James, start with the first one. So this is, I think essentially what we're doing now, but we want to continue. We want to do more, but we want to do it better. And that's strengthening partnerships, coordinating all of the initiatives that are happening, not just in the region, but across the state and federally, and then sharing successes and best practices. Before this group got started, we were talking to all of you individually and finding out, well, there's a lot of great things happening, but organizations aren't necessarily connected and this work isn't necessarily organized. Maybe we're going after the same funding sources. So, we really want to make sure that we're working together collaboratively and coordinating all of those efforts. So that was the first around, and that's not just for adoption. That's across the board. Next bullet. And we want to expand and implement coordinated outreach and public education activities that really raise awareness and build support. And again, this was something that was being done on sort of a one-off basis. So we really want to have a comprehensive outreach campaign and communications strategy for the region. Next slide, or bullet. To develop technical assistance and shared resources that support organization working to advance digital equity and inclusion. Advocating for, seeking, and implementing sustainable funding for digital equity programming and services that increase broadband adoption and advance digital literacy. This is definitely something we learned when we were doing interviews with local jurisdictions, is like, we really want to be doing this work, but there is absolutely no funding. We don't have staffing. We don't have the resources. And I'm not just talking about local jurisdictions, but there's, community groups as well that are under-resourced for this work. So we want to bring more resources to the region for not just building out digital infrastructure, but helping with advancing digital literacy in the region as well. Expanding and improving, again, public broadband data availability and mapping resources. The not just broadband, but one of the areas that we're lacking information right now is on devices, right? It's one thing to have the internet. You could have internet in your home, but if you don't have a device to be able to connect, that's an issue. So that's not something that we've been able to get through survey data that we've been able to acquire. That's not a question that's on the American Community Survey. I know some of you have done your own surveys. We really want to start to compile that information and see if we have enough information to be able to start to identify gaps in that area. So we'll stop here and ask again if there's any questions or feedback on the adoption side strategies.
I guess I was wondering, are we looking as a group to collaborate on grant funding or grant applications, or are you looking to be a resource for when we pursue our own grant applications? Or
I think it's a combination, Kelsey. I think we will, as organizations, be seeking our own funding, but now you have more people to support you with those grant applications, right? Writing letters of support, being part of your team. And then I think there will be opportunities where regionally there's big asks, to do some of these larger like infrastructure projects. So I think it's a combination. Charlene.
Yes, and looking at the broadband and stuff, finding out agencies that are helping people and how many people with a disability are actually getting assistance to accessing the internet through equipment. Blind people have screen readers, but not everybody has access to getting screen readers. If you're voc rehab, you get one level, and if you aren't, you're basically on the bottom looking up and wishing. So that would be something to be interesting to investigate and find out information on, is for people that are disadvantaged by either disability or some people just because of their location don't have maybe as high educational levels as other people will have. What is being done to get them into the digital level?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good, well, let me take Chip here really quickly before I go on to the next slide. But Charlene, that's an area where we don't have we haven't been successful in acquiring data and information. So we want to ask all of you to help us with that. Chip, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to just make a comment, and that is that throughout our history as a nation, there's been these opportunities when we saw the benefits that resulted from good public policy. And whether that was the building of the railroads in the early days and some of the land grants that went that way, or whether it was getting electricity out to all of our communities across the nation, and or whether it was building the national highway system. If you look at all of those, they were a result of good public policy that allowed for that to happen. And honestly, when you look at what we're trying to accomplish here, this really kind of should fit into that same category. And I think we could look back at history, at some of the policies that were done in the past to look for where there's opportunities for the future for this.
Thanks, Chip. Antoinette, I'm looking at the time. We have a little over 5 minutes left, and I want to be respectful of the Verizon item that we also had at the end. Shahryar, I've tried to promote you to panelist, but you should be able to still unmute yourself.
So you recall one of our strategies was around policies and permit streamlining, and Verizon had sent us a document that they prepared and wanted to share just about that and some of the recommendations they have based on their experiences. So we'll send it out with we can probably attach it to the chat and send it out as well. But I'll let Shahryar talk through it really quickly before we close out.
No, actually, thank you. I didn't want to take more of our time. Since your momentum is so good, I don't want to disrupt anything. But yeah, please share those comments. Obviously, permitting and policies and regulations and codes and jurisdictions continue to be the challenge for us. So we'll let our recommendations speak for themselves, and we can speak to it later, or if people have comments or questions, they can get back to me directly. But I don't want to take more of our time. Thanks so much.
All right, we'll send it out, Shahryar, and we'll have people direct specific comments to you if you're good with that. If you're good with getting emails from folks.
Yes, that's okay. Bring it on.
All right. Okay, so let's go on then to the next steps, please. So we'd like you to take a look at the outline, the strategy, send comments to Crystal via email. And we'll send, you don't have to write this down right now or try to capture it. We'll send this out in email, but we're asking for your comments by July 16th. So that gives you a couple of weeks to do that. Then just a reminder that we're doing all of the 100 stakeholder interviews with the Cisco team starting July 12th. So that'll occur July 12th through July 23rd. And many of you are going to be asked to participate in those interviews, and you'll get an email to register for a time slot for an interview. So keep an eye out for that, and please try to make it work if you're asked to participate there.
And Crystal, you skipped that, to give Shahryar time, you skipped the call to action. And if you can take 2 minutes to kind of go over that.
Oh, yes, we can go back to that in a minute. We're also going to be kicking off our, let me just finish these next steps.
Yes,
we're going to be kicking off the economic impact analysis. And there's a few of you that volunteered to be on a little work group for that. We've been working on getting a consultant on board for that. And we're pretty close to having that consultant underway. So you'll be getting a meeting notice probably for later this month for the economic impact analysis of universal broadband for the region. And then we already talked about the Speakers Bureau. So let's go back to the call to action. Thank you for that reminder, Sanjeev. Okay, so this is where we're still lacking information and don't have good data. So many of your organizations work on these particular areas. You know, San Diego Futures gets devices to people who needs it, does digital literacy and training. Not sure if you guys have surveys that you can share with us. But we also want to do a really good inventory of programs and services that exist in the region and want your help with doing that. So we're hoping that one of you would graciously volunteer to kind of lead a small little work group, like we have other small work groups going on looking at other aspects of the digital divide to help us to put together a plan for acquiring this data or to start to assemble the data and information that exists today.
Right. In many cases, many organizations have their own data, and I think just bringing all that together region-wide would be useful.
This is where the task part of the task force comes. We're giving you some work. We're asking for volunteers.
I'm not seeing raised hands.
Everybody jump up all at once. Well, you can think about that and get back to us, but we would really like somebody to sort of chair a small work group around this. The city of San Diego. Yes, thank you, Kelsey. Go.
Thank you.
We need this for some funding anyways, funding requests anyways.
Exactly.
Awesome, thank you. All right, we're right on time, 3:59. Remember July 16th, please get your feedback in and we'll be getting together again shortly to show you how we've addressed all of your comments and feedback and start getting into the real details of action.
Right.
Thanks, everyone. Have a happy, safe holiday.
You too.
Thank you.
Take
And
care.
everybody else.
Thank you.
Thank
Peace.
you, Antoinette.